Fulbright Scholarship, and I was having a show at Studio Marconi in Milan, and I'll show you some pictures from that exhibit. But this is the sketches I was doing for this piece. And, and I wrote down, at the time of the clay fight, which was Muhammad Ali's fight, and it was also important, what it said is on a stretched canvas. So to me, it's a kind of complicated piece. There's a lot of connections for me. But the, let's see, the next picture is another drawing from that. That Muhammad Ali was really a kind of primary influence or inspiration, because in 1967 he refused to fight in Vietnam, and as a conscientious objector. And just a little background, I was a student at Berkeley during the 60s, and Vietnam and civil rights were enormous issues. They were really traumatic issues, and we were, as students, you couldn't, and there was the draft, which was also enormously traumatic. And you couldn't, think of the war in Vietnam as somebody else's problem. It was your problem, whether you liked it or not. And not only was it our problem, but it was also our problem just being students, because the campus was tear gassed. Usually once or twice a semester where we'd be in class and the National Guard would come, or helicopters would fly over, and there were protests, and we would just have to leave school. And it became a big, everything was up for questioning. Like, what's the point of school if the country is waging this unjust war? Should we even be students? What should we be doing? So, in this atmosphere, for Muhammad Ali to say, I'm not going to fight, to me was really a powerful gesture on his part. And this piece, let me just show you the actual, so this is the piece from 1972 that was in the show. And so, for me, when in 1971, in March of 1971, he had the Joe Frazier fight, but that wasn't what it was about. For me, it was the fight with the Supreme Court in the United States government in June of 1971, where he won his conscientious objector status. So for me, what it was is that this was Muhammad Ali's place of his conscience. That he lost. He lost the fight to Frazier, but he won the fight with the U.S. government, and that to me was much more important. It wasn't really boxing, but his gesture as a boxer, as a fighter, seemed to be just so enormous. And it's maybe it's kind of corny now. He threw in the towel, meaning I'm not fighting. And so in a way, it's an ambivalent piece because it's about a fighter not fighting. But it was also for me important for me because it was on a stretched canvas, and that to me also was about being an artist, and that the area of the canvas, kind of metaphorically, was the area of art making, and being a fighter was again a kind of situation where just being an artist, or myself being an artist, that ring is also my ring, my terrain, and what am I going to do with that? And am I going to follow my conscience as well as an artist? And what does it mean if I leave the ring? Can I still be an artist? So there are lots of issues and things that this piece brought out, and on a lot of different levels. So again, this was made actually in for the show, and the one that's here in the gallery is I made it pretty much as close as I can get to the original. And this, I'm going to show you a few other pieces from the Marconi show. I actually forgot what this is even called. It was right next to it. And it's a canvas high up on the wall. And what I did in Italy, I just went around the street and I gathered rubble and just stuff that was laying around, sidewalks and construction sites. And I just had a ladder from the rubble to the canvas. And it just seemed to me like art making was this, could be a place that was either elevated above where we live, or is it, or is it something unreachable, or unattainable, or pure, or where is the reality? Where is the focus This is a kind of sorry, a wider view of the gallery. And the other piece I want to talk about is, you see there's a, yeah, thanks. Okay, there's a washing machine here, and this is a better view. There's 2 washing machines, but one of them, there's 2 washing machines, and one is filled with dirt, and one is filled with soap. So it was a loop that one machine would make your clothes dirty, and one machine would make your clothes clean. And to me, where this, again, this is a really, in the period of the Vietnam War, this was called channeling, and it was a loop that if you fought in Vietnam and you were injured, they would take you out, get you healthy, get you well, and put you back. If you didn't want to fight in the war, they would, okay, you would not fight in the war, but then you would do something else that ultimately still led to the war. So it was a kind of loop that, you were getting dirty, but you were getting clean, but you were still in the loop. You were still in this rotation where the U.S. government could use whatever you did for their purpose. I remember about this time talking to another teacher. He was a mathematician, and he said he was hired to work on problems, but what he realized was eventually they were missile trajectories, even though he didn't know that exactly, but again, it was kind of like he was in this loop. We want you to do this, but we're not telling you why. So it was all used kind of as a war support. And of course, the university itself, there was enormous protests and questioning about the role of the university in combat, which they wouldn't admit the research that they were doing. Okay, this is 1969. And this is a performance piece called Smile Support. And this is, these are bags of meat, and they're pulleys on the wall, and fish hooks that I dipped in wax, so they didn't really hurt my mouth, but they just made it so that it could pull my mouth into a smile. So this, again, was a kind of direct response to the war in Vietnam, which was extremely disturbing and very depressing, and it was kind of hard to smile, or hard to be like, everything's great. Everything wasn't great, but this was a kind of expression of how, smiling in the face of disaster and nightmare. And then, kind of about the same time as well, and this was a series of prints I did called Bodies of the Water. And I think this was maybe influenced by the Apollo 8 view of the planet Earth, and seeing Earth from afar. And I tried to imagine, or thought of it, what would it be if my body was the Earth? And where would lakes be? So I did this series, and I tried to find places on my body that corresponded in some way to where an actual lake would be. So this is called Adams Lake, British Columbia, and that's my Adams apple area. And also I used an overlay. You can see a kind of NASA grid here to give it a sort of a scientific-ish overview, and it was perhaps you were in a spacecraft going over this planet, and this is what you were seeing. This is the Great Salt Lake in Utah. This is Hidden Lake, California, and this is the small of my back, which I never see really. So this is, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm sorry, Hot Springs, Arkansas. Lake Erie. Lewis and Clark's Lake, and the explorers, explorers using their legs, exploring. Lookout Point Reservoir in Oregon. This is a little bit of a stretch. Muscle Bay, I meant it to be muscle, like your bicep muscle, but this is the closest I can find, something like that. Anyway, Muscle Bay in South Africa. And this is my navel, and it's Mother Lode Lake in California. And this is Pyramid Lake in Nevada. And the kind of area in my chest kind of looks like a pyramid. And this is the last one in this series called Pool. Pool is kind of a nondescript, but still a body of water. So let's see. So after this, or even simultaneously of this, at this time I was working on a lot of ideas kind of simultaneously. Some just were realized sooner than others. But I eventually realized that even though I was an art student and I studied art and I was doing art work, what was also important is I was reading a lot of psychology at this time, and I realized that even more important than art was family or family history, and it was a kind of paradox. I realized that I was a part of, when you're part of a family, other people see you as that part of that family. Like someone will say, oh, you look just like your dad, you look like your mom, you look like your brother or sister or whatever. But I couldn't see that. I knew that I was part of the family, but I also couldn't directly see the connection always. But I knew there was a connection, both DNA connection as well as physical connection. But it was a very large issue for me, and it was sort of beneath the surface for a long time. But around this time, I began to so anyway, it started to surface and become a more important thing. It was kind of like, to me, it was leaving art making that I was seeing all around, and kind of it was just a very, very personal exploration. So what I did, this is the first, I'm just showing you the beginning of a series called Relations. And Relations was, I went through my family's photo album, and at the time, again, there's no digital, nothing was digital. And these were slides, and I reproduced my family's photo album, and wearing white clothes and using two small mirrors, I tried to fit myself into the projected pictures of members of my family. And this is a photograph that a photographer took after a performance in San Francisco in 1974. So, I don't know if you can, it's very difficult to see, but right here is a closet mirror, and I have one on this side as well. So there were just two mirrors on either side of me, and I wore white, and also the projector was on wheels, so it could go back and forth, and it took a little while to get each one hit to the right size. So this is my father and a friend from school, probably in 1908, 1909, something like that. And so what the process was in front of it, as a performance, was I tried to fit myself into the picture as best I could. And sometimes the process was very easy, and sometimes it never worked. But it didn't matter because it was still important to align myself with images of my family. Just as a background, I'm the first generation American. My family narrowly escaped Nazi Germany. So there was a lot of loaded historical references for me in the image. So it was a lot larger than just a picture of somebody. But yeah, it was about alignment. And also for me, sometimes it was confusing. This is my mother when she was 19. So what you're seeing is only the end result of the performance. So it would have been the slide of her, and then I would try to fit myself into it, and it would take from a few minutes to 5 minutes or so. It was a very, to me, it was a very meditative process. It wasn't trying to be entertaining. You know, it was really a kind of personal, how can I put it, personal truth or personal fact, and trying to connect visually with, you know, with relations and kind of relations in many understandings. This is my father when he was also, I think, early 20s, or he was probably younger than I was when I did this. This is my mother and my grandmother on vacation. And what I'm saying to you is pretty much all I know about the pictures. I don't always know even that much. Sometimes I didn't know who was in the picture, but this is my parents on their wedding day. And my father. I think it was 1933. This is my mother holding me in 1948 or 49. And this is my grandmother, who I never met. And this was my uncle, who was a very important member of the family. He always had boxers, and it was in the photo album. So, you know, what the hell, it was just part of the family. Something with photo, that sort of family. Anyway. This is my mother and my grandfather, who I also never met. And I think this is not long after they came to New York. This series, you know, I'm showing you only like 10 or so or less images, but it really comprised of maybe 15, 20, 25 images. And because there was really no end, it was just, I just tried to choose the ones that worked, that I could align myself into. And there was one place I did this. It was a performance exhibition called All Night Sculptures in San Francisco, and I think I did it pretty much for hours. And what was uncanny is that it was in a long room, and when someone came into the room, if I was in the picture, they couldn't really see me in the picture. It looked like it was just a projection on a wall. But then I would move, and it was sort of like, you know, the picture was coming to life. So it was a little bit of a time travel. It was a space travel. It was a lot of, you know, a lot of about looking or relating to photography. And you'll see I explored that idea in subsequent images and series. Actually, oh yeah, this is another one. This is my mother and her brother at a party. I have no idea where and when, and I'm some random guy at the party. I think, yeah, this is my mother and that's my uncle. There was a lot like that in the photo album as well. Okay, and then the next series I did, I called it Making History. And since I went back in time with my family album, I realized, oh, I could go back in time to my album. So this was just taken from my photo album. This is me at some playground, probably 1950. This is the same picture of my mother holding me. This time I'm me in that picture. And I had a beard, and I had a beard at different times along the way, but it was just so good. That's the way it was. This is me in the first grade. dress up and pose. And this is a student identity card. I was a student at the Louvre for a while, and this is my student card. Again, I'm only showing you very few of each series. So the next series, again, is not only did I realize, well, there's my family and my family photo album, but I used to go to flea markets when I was in California, and I realized there was somebody selling photo albums, and I was like, whoa, with these people, and I just bought somebody else's photo album, and it was just so odd that they would not want it, but they were for sale for a couple of bucks, and I thought, being a first-generation American, like, who are Americans, this is called Perfect Strangers. So this piece is about just strangers, just from someone else's photo album. I don't know if you can see, but about me, somebody wrote me. And we seem to be very, I don't know, something very American. I don't know what it was. I imagine this might be the First World War. I guess he's a documenter. Let's see what's next. Okay. The next one is, this was a piece called Dog. And this was a little bit, it was a little bit self-reflexive, this piece. And I went to a dog show, and I took pictures of dogs that were there, and also street dogs. And I guess I was feeling a little bit, when you do performance, it's kind of both best in show, trying to be best in show like these dogs are, but I felt dogs are trained, and I just wondered, am I trained as an artist to be best in show, or why am I doing this? So I just did dogs in this piece, and I guess I felt like performance in a way was, I was beginning to see the limitations or the questioning of it, and it was the idea that you were in front of an audience as entertainment or spectacle was a little bit disturbing to me, even though I kind of continued on to have kind of more spectacle and entertainment. But I began to question that at the same time, like, is this what I am as an artist, trying to be best in show? Yes, I think I made, gosh, it's been so long, I think I made a video of this, but I didn't look in the mirror. I had two friends telling me where to move. So they were instructing me where to move to get into the image. And that seems to be good. There are some variations of this that I did. And this is a sweet dog that doesn't need, obviously it doesn't need thoroughbred. Okay, now this is another variation. This is called Constellations. This is actually done in New York at 112 Greene Street. And this is, let's see if I can help you understand this. You're looking at the ceiling, and I'm on the ceiling only about a foot away from the ceiling, and that ring is an aluminum hoop. It's about 10 feet in diameter, and across it I stretched a fishnet, a nylon fishnet, and then I climbed up a ladder, scooted myself into the hoop, and then the ladder was removed, and then I had an assistant on the ground with a projector and a front surface mirror, projecting the constellations onto the ceiling, onto me, and helping me move so I fit into the constellation. So again, when I was thinking about projection, when we look at the sky, there's all these random stars, and yet people see in them figures, and it seemed like another projection of us onto the universe, onto our environment, and it just seemed like a connection that I felt I was a part of to place myself into that position of those figures. And I don't, let's see, I had to write it down. Yeah, this is Andromeda. And this is Aquarius. And again, this was, it never was this light, it was in complete darkness. And again, it was very meditative. The artist would lie down on the floor and look up, kind of like you're looking at the sky. Yeah, the only light in the room was the stars. There was no other light, so it was much darker than this. This is Cassio's Dia. This is Cephus. This is Orion. And this is Perseus. Yeah, it was much more like this. But again, when you in the space rock, it just becomes accustomed to it, so you do see more than just the stars. So that was it. Yeah, and this took maybe like an hour of going through. This is most of the images. Let's see. Oh, okay. This is another piece that I did. This was a little. There are lots of elements in this. This is a piece I did called Perfect Father. And it was really about, again, another aspect of projection. Not only am I standing or fitting myself in projection, it was also about projecting. So the projector became a kind of metaphor or vehicle to project an image on someone else that I thought was kind of psychologically something that I or we do, like I imagine them to be somebody that they're not, to make a narrative about somebody else. And so this was done actually with my father, who was nice enough to help me out. He's blindfolded and wearing white, and I'm fitting him into projections of kind of large, famous people as a projected image. And they were people from like Louis Pasteur, Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein. This is Henry Ford. Gosh, I forgot who this is. President somewhere. This may have been Sigmund Freud. What was interesting to me is also the space that I did this in. This is Thomas Mann, a German writer. What was ideal for me though on this, it was an enormous space. I can't remember what it was. And there was no white walls, which was perfect. So I could just project the image into space. So the image itself, everything but where it landed on my father dropped away. So it was just on him. There was no background because it just disappeared. And the light you see, that was the door. And also this was in daylight. So this space was extremely dark, even in the middle of the day. But yes, so basically the process, there was no mirror in this. I was the one who was doing the manipulating. And as I said, my father was blindfolded, since it was about kind of the image of perfection, or the kind of what would a perfect father be, as if that would be a perfect father, which of course it wasn't, but it was just as an idea. And this was one more kind of more challenging variation on this idea, and that is I projected a film called The Moon and Sixpence about the life of Gauguin. It was a terrible movie, but it was starring George Sanders, I guess. And in order to do this, these are just 4 images of the same piece. But I built a cart. This is a cart, and on the cart it has wheels, and this is the projector, 16mm projector, and it's on a platform that can raise and lower that way as well. So it could go in and out and up and down, so that the projectionist could follow me trying to fit into this image in the movie that was constantly changing. So it was a very hands-on, way of trying to keep up with the movie, which I was trying to do as well. So these are just some stills from the movie that I rehearsed and learned the parts visually. And I also did this at a museum, so it seemed, it was called starring, and just in a way, you show your work in a museum, you're kind of starring a role as the artist. And I felt, well, okay, I'll star the role as an artist. And so I played, or tried to keep up with Gauguin in this movie. I didn't speak, but I just, tried to keep up. And sometimes I could, and sometimes I couldn't. But even if I couldn't, it didn't matter, because I was still trying to, to attain the unattainable, to this maybe Hollywood or movie narrative of what an artist is or can be or should be in a museum. There's a lot of issues there, but they were all pretty interesting to me. I guess Gauguin married. He was already married, but I guess he left his family and got married again. And this was not only was it a museum, but it was also crowded. There was a lot of people who came to see this, and I was a little taken aback. It was difficult to handle in the sense of it became a kind of entertainment vehicle, and I didn't really think of it as entertainment. It was just it was kind of a struggle, and I began to have doubts about performance as what the audience was expecting, and it was also a bit of a paradox too, because I couldn't really see what I was doing. I was in the image, but I couldn't really see myself in the image. So it was both of those things going on, and so I only saw, I didn't see what the audience was seeing. So I only did a few more works on this series, and then I went on to eventually video, and then I went to sculpture. But one of the next one I did was called Sightseeing, and it just seemed, again for me, like looking at a photograph, whatever it is, there's a kind of transportation or entrapment that you get in representation where you imagine, wow, especially with travel, like what would it be like to be there? Well, I can imagine myself in that place, which is really the point, but I kind of, so I reproduced a lot of travel brochures, and it was a bit like traveling, like going to Costa del Sol, or, just being somewhere else. And, photography, the experience of photography is a kind of travel, that you imagine yourself or put yourself in someone else's place at, not only, not just time, but place and who they are. This is a gambling casino. This was done long ago. I don't even remember exactly where these are. This is London, sightseeing in London. Yeah, this is from the 70s, so the camera is a 1970s, probably Super 8. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. I think I'm open for questions.
I would like to kick off the questions, if I may.
Sure.
My question is about this idea of kind of entering into somebody else's life and somebody else's body. There is an edge of kind of body horror in that. Is that something you were thinking about, or is that a sort of overlay from, I mean, the whole idea of kind of the body snatchers and things like that, as metaphors for the Cold War. I mean, it just seems like that might be an edge in there.
Wow, I guess I didn't think of it that way, but sure, no. Yeah, it's just, yeah, I guess looking at photographs for me, sorry, my face seems to be rubbing. Looking at photographs, sorry. Looking at photographs was a, was a kind of, as I said, travel. And I think looking at, because my parents were immigrants, that to me was a key because I very gradually, sorry, apologize, for trying to understand their history through photographs. So, because they didn't talk about their experiences very much, looking at pictures was extremely loaded because I could imagine or try to imagine or began to imagine, wow, they were there, or this happened to somebody in my family, or, you know, how did that, you know, it was through photographs, not, and maybe because I'm a visual, that, you know, I could read about it, but the photographs were very disturbing and moving. So I'm not sure that's your question, but yeah.
Other questions?
I don't know. I think I'll just shout.
No, we're actually recording this, so hold on, I'm gonna get the other one. This one here is
Stephen, thank you. That amazing. I have a question about so many questions. Well, the question I have is about humor in your work, because I find myself drawn to it, but I'm not sure it's always intended. And how do you manage that? Is it intended by you? How will we think about the humor in your work, if it's there?
Well, I'm trying to be funny. Maybe that's why it's so fun. Yeah, it's just, I think there is humor to it, sure. But it's also very serious, but it does, you know, maybe, yeah, maybe humor, you know, there's no failure, you know, like when there were some images I just couldn't fit into, it's just impossible. But, and that sometimes was humorous, but to me it was just, you know, sometimes things don't work out. But even if they don't work out, they can be funny, but it doesn't hide the fact that, you know, I don't know, I think there's an underlying seriousness for all of these to me. I mean, you know, almost to the point of like, why did I do that? Or, wow, did I understand what I was doing? But, yeah, there is humor to that. But I don't think it was conscious. I didn't search out these to make them, oh, this will be funny. I never thought that way. It just was a byproduct of trying to do this.
Other questions?
I loved your work, and I love the connection that I found between one of your images and film. It was wonderful that you're combining film and this exhibition too. That's a plug for whoever thought of that. It's wonderful. The image of Adam's Lake with things coming out of your Adam's apple, it just reminded me of, this is going to be weird, Andalusian Dog,
Oh, yeah.
by Well,
Yeah, I
where
know that.
you have the hollow of your Adam's apple, and if you raise your arm in that film, ants coming out of under someone's arm, again the hollow.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about that? Everybody everybody knows that image of the ants coming out.
Yeah, to me it's his hand. I think there's one of his hand opening and there are ants falling out of his hand. Yeah, I know that film only too well.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, good point, but I don't know consciously if there was a connection, but I do know that film. It's still so powerful and haunting, decades and decades later.
And by the way, I had nothing to do with the film Raging Bull, but I would suggest everybody see it. Scorsese's 1980 film. It won for the best film of the 1980s. Not just of 1980 when it was done, but of the whole decade. There's a lot of surrealism in it in a way. People say that De Niro did his own fighting, and that if he kept on it for a couple more months, he could have been, as Marlon Brando said, he could have been a contender.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great film.
Thank you, Stephen. That was, going through all this was quite, was interesting. So, as the audience were seeing you in these different places, and you were trying to imagine in your family and people you didn't know. So, what was it like for you? Did you feel like you had revelations about the people who you were in the movie, in the slides, and in the slides, and in relationship to your family? Did you? I mean, we don't have to go into it deeply, but did you have some feeling of understanding in relationship to your family?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, sometimes it was very uncanny to fit into an image because as I mentioned, sometimes it would be very confusing, especially with my mother and father. It was like I could try to move the nose, but it wasn't my nose I was moving. It's like, oh wait, no, that's not me, that's them. So yes, there was a definitely, it was very visual, but I think, I don't know how to say this, but the underlying feelings were very emotional and very personal. So even though it was there was a physical resemblance, it was also a kind of connection to them as who they were and also their history. And it was I guess in answer to your question, it was a kind of a private exploration of family, of who they were, and it wasn't always benign. It was a very difficult, to put it mildly, difficult connection, both who they were as people and where they came from, and their getting here, or getting to America. So it was kind of a process of discovery, and I was just sort of beginning to learn about that while I was doing this. So, this is, I know it sounds pretty useless, but it was a little bit tip of the iceberg. What you see is really only the top, the physical resemblance, but, personality-wise and who they were and who I was, that was, the tentacle of just what you saw. And that's, I don't know how to articulate that, but that was for me, the value. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. I've never seen your work before, and I'm blown away. It's really amazing. I find it really interesting your investigation of your role as the artist and how you perceive and how the artist perceived. And are you doing? I'd love to see performances of the actual pieces.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting. Are you thinking about doing any more of that?
I haven't. Like I said, it's, when I did it, I was in my 20s, and, it was a kind of moment of performance. I know people are still doing performances, but at the time it was a kind of a beginning of a burgeoning art form. But these terms anymore. And now I'm doing sculpture, but yeah, like I mentioned before, I think it was difficult. They were very personal, but it was difficult because of the audience, and I began to question not only who I was, but began to question who the audience was and why they were there. And I'll tell you a story. I probably shouldn't say this on camera, but when I was doing the relations piece, I got a call, and it was from Francis Ford Coppola's secretary, and she said, "Oh, we've heard about the performance you're doing, and Francis wants you to come by and perform for his dinner guests." And wow, and I thought, oh, and here I was a 20-something-year-old artist, and I was a little bit haughty, and I thought, why didn't Francis call me? That would have been, maybe, if he called me personally, maybe that would have convinced him. But the fact that he didn't call me, and it was his secretary, I thought, oh, I was his entertainment for dinner, and that just began to change, like, wow, I didn't understand that that's how someone saw what I was doing, that I could be, like the jester for the king, or, oh, isn't this cute, or funny, or whatever. So, yeah, that led me, again, to begin to withdraw a little bit, just, again, it was just all in question. And I, frankly, I didn't. I was doing this as a naive, experimental artist. I really, I didn't understand who audiences and what it was and how that worked and what it meant or not. So it was really, just naively going forward in this art form. And it was just gradually, the more I did it, the more I kind of began to have an understanding of what it was about or who I was, maybe as an artist. So, and it just changed.
Steve, we were talking before your talk, and we were talking about that time back when San Francisco, the sort of artists who were doing things that disappeared. Some were documented, but they only existed as documentation. Some were done for, like you were talking about, an all-night thing at a loft where people come in and perform, and that was the end of that. So the radicality of making art that was in the moment and not caring about its longevity or, the impact of it or the content living past the initial experience of it. And I'm wondering, now, I think back then we were also thinking we weren't going to live that long, right? That the idea of growing old, and especially, being an old artist, all of those things that we are living now. I'm just curious whether there's a sense of, that regret that those moments don't stay as present as they were at the time, whether it's easy to let go. And I'm saying this from a painter's point of view, which is about it living way past me, or that's the ambition of it, whether it's true or not, but it's the ambition. So it's an opposite idea of what the art experience is, should be, could be, whatever. And it was something that's been a complicated thing for our whole generation. The people working in all those different directions to do it. I'm just curious if you have some thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, it was very frustrating and bewildering in a way to spend so much time presenting a work and then it was gone. Or someone said, what happened? Or what did you do? And you try to say that in a way you realize they'll never see it, they'll never understand it because that's it. And yeah, and I eventually, well, it's complicated because at the time, non-objective art that was non-commercial, there was no object to sell, or it wasn't a commodity, was also a bit of the spirit of kind of the Vietnam War. We just, it was kind of non-participation in any way you could in the country, in the economy, in any war effort, anything that would go further that cause. So doing art that had no object to it seemed to make sense in that environment. And of course, there were so many other artists who were like early Hans Haga pieces, and I remember there would be an air show. So there was a lot of other works that had no residue. But then you think about earth art, and then earth art, wait, there's all those photographs of earth art, and then that's how people remembered those because they didn't necessarily go there. And so for me, the problem was, is there a way I could do this that would last or be, endure more than just, a few images? And so that's when I started to branch out into video and to try to incorporate, at the time, some of the projection ideas into video. And a few of them seemed to work okay. Eventually, I just wanted to use my hands more, so I began to make objects in sculpture. But yeah, I think the video was an attempt to somehow duplicate what I was doing, but it could never really duplicate it. It became a kind of a poor, version of it. So then I began to do projections that were not involving me. I did a piece called White Food, which is I got this kind of neutral Vietnam film, and I projected it on a white meal, potatoes and ice cream, butter, or white bread, and rice, anything white. And that was the kind of attempt. It was, again, projection, but without myself being in it, but just creating an environment for that. And I did others that go like that, but ultimately, video, the problem with video was, I was either had to do it really well, like, it's editing, filmmaking, or I was beginning to compete with commercial and professional work, and I just didn't feel that direction was right for me either. So I just felt better starting to use my hands to make objects and things, which still deal with some, many of the same themes, but in a different way. Yeah, they use photography and made into objects, but yeah, it was a different format. But yeah, I know what you mean, and I think it's a little like, does this still exist? Other than here I'm showing you this, but you didn't know about the work. And maybe there's a couple of pictures here and there, but yeah, I think that's just the nature of performance or history, like you and I were talking about. Pieces that we saw, but if you weren't there, it doesn't exist. That's interesting. Yes.
It feels like you're showing a sort of a legendary body of work that many people may have missed. I'm sorry that I did. It's fascinating to see, but I'm curious, aside from the obvious aspect of your both presence and absence in all of this long series of photographic work, how do you relate it, and how did you choose to emphasize it with the sculpture upstairs? And may I ask about your sculpture presently? I think the piece upstairs is very powerful and clearly works on historic levels, the references that you make to Vietnam War, Ali's incredible behavior as a conscientious objector, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just wondering how you decided to present yourself today with the emphasis on these works in relation to the piece upstairs.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think this is really from the same time period, like 69 to 75, and yeah, to me they all seem to be very connected. They're all performative. It's about engagement either potential engagement or seeing an engagement in the object. But that's a good point. You know, there is a kind of invisibility. I mean, when I fit myself into a picture, I do kind of disappear. And to me, that was part of it, I think. Maybe not just consciously, but it was like, what would it be like to be disappearing in this photograph or travel in that photograph mentally? And I think that was in a way, it's, you know, yeah, like I said before, it's like, you know, the process of my looking at the photograph is very, it's very complicated. You know, like engage, travel, what would it be like if I was there? Who are those people? Am I connected to it? So it's a very mental operation, as well as physical, via physical route. But yeah, that's a good point. It is about invisibility, I think. And the boxing is too. There's no one in the ring. So it's imagining, you know, what that might be or who might use that space.
Would you say that there's a thread through from this older work to the work that you're doing now? Or do you feel that you've grown away from it?
No, there's definitely a thread. Yeah, because my website and
I am going to go to your website.
It's hard to describe without actually having these in front of us. But yeah, for many years I did work where I took a photograph, usually always a documentary photograph, and I put it inside an object that was very large. So the photograph was only an inch by an inch or an inch by 2 inches, but the object it was in was maybe 3 or 4 feet big in many different directions. How can I sum this up? It's often they were from Vietnam, so let's see if I can. There was a picture I found of the U.S. Navy Imaging Command in D.C. of a Santa Claus giving candy to the troops in Vietnam. So that image was tiny, and then I made a sort of very abstracted Santa hat and silver leafed it. So all the pieces that series were gold leafed and silver leafed. So that the photograph, unlike this, the viewer had to come very close to the photograph. It was like almost like a poach's stamp. And they were lured, that's kind of the word I've thought about, lured by the shiny object, but the photograph, which was small, was actually the most important thing. And the object, which was really big, was, again, kind of a frame. It was a frame of the photograph. But the photograph was in time, in past time, and the object was in present time. So it was kind of a, two time zones meeting, one in the past, one in the present. And by having the audience member go close to the picture, they were actually going, coming up to something that was sometimes very difficult and very problematic. And I think that came out of often when as a young child even, I would look at a picture in a newspaper or a book, and it could be really small, it could be really scary. And it to me was like, something that could be so small could actually be so large. And that idea of kind of an inverted cone or hourglass that you're going through something small into an enormous idea or an enormous event that had enormous repercussions, and yet you pass through this something that was just a tiny opening. Anyway, that's kind of what my thesis were.
Well, I would just like to thank you, Stephen, for today.